just a little bit about Lawrence before we start. So Lawrence is a marine biologist and ocean campaigner with the Humane Society International. Their work is dedicated to animal welfare and environmental conservation and building an ecologically sustainable and humane world for all animals. Now, the HSI has offices all over the world, with our Australian office opening here in 1994 here in Avalon on the Northern Beaches. Since they opened, they've had some huge successes, beginning with the court case against the Japanese whaling in the Antarctic, the nominating of great white sharks for federal protection in 1992, and last year challenging Queensland's shark control program in the Great Barrier Reef. All up, they've nominated over 70 threatened species of shark for federal protection, including many sharks and rays, and continue to campaign to alleviate threats to our oceans and Australia's iconic marine wildlife. Lawrence came to Australia 7 years ago from the States to study marine biology and began working with HSI in 2018. Working to protect the ocean and living on the Northern Beaches is an absolute dream. And one of their main focuses right now is for their shark campaign. Is the New South Wales Shark Meshing Program, otherwise known as shark nets. We will put up some more information about HSI in a little bit in the links and furthermore, but without further ado, I will introduce you to Lawrence to get started. So Lawrence, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yes, and thank you, Carmen, for having me. Thank you, Dive Spear Sport, for setting up this awesome series of webinars that they've done since we've all been kind of stuck at home the last few weeks. So yeah, this is just a great idea, and I'm really proud and happy to be a part of it. So thanks for inviting me. And just to piggyback a little bit off what she was talking about, how we became involved with Dive Spear Sport is because we needed a boat to go check out the nets and to photograph things that were caught in it. So I've been out a couple times with Fabio on a little aluminium boat there, and they've helped us out quite a bit. Getting some of the images that you'll see in the presentation today. So it's definitely what I've going to talk to you guys about is definitely split into two distinct parts. First, I'll just generally talk about the sharks and rays here on the Northern Beaches and that can be seen in New South Wales, and then I'll go into how we as humans interact with them and deal with trying to mitigate a real but very slight risk of shark-human interactions, and that's when I'll go into New South Wales Shark Meshing Program. So if I'll just share my screen and get this started. Okay. I will just go ahead and dive right in then. So again, thank you guys for having me. As Carmen said, I'm with Humane Society International. So we'll just, like I said, just get started right with it. So sharks and rays, this is kind of basic information. I don't think you're going to be joining in on a Dive Shops webinar if you don't know much about sharks and rays. So I'm sure everyone has a little base knowledge of what we're talking about here today. It is the class Chondrichthyes. It's a group of organisms that are jawed vertebrates. They have paired fins, and they have scales in the form of denticles that give these animals their sandpapery-like feel. There's 322 species of sharks and rays and skates in Australia, and about 60% of those are endemic, meaning they're found nowhere else in the world. So Australia is seen as a very significant shark and ray biodiversity hotspot throughout the world. So we're all very, very lucky to live where we are if you have any interest in these animals. Of course, the number one thing that all these animals have in similarity is their skeleton. I'm sure everyone knows that these have skeletons made of cartilage, just like our ears or the tips of our nose. And I like to start with this slide because the subclass Elasmobranchi, which includes those three kinds of animals, sharks, rays, and skates, has this incredible diversity of different body types, different behaviors, different feeding ecologies. And there's just an array right here on this front slide of how you can still be an elasmobranch, and yet you could be so different. So whale sharks, great white sharks, sawfish, which are actually technically rays, not sharks, even though they look more like a shark. And of course, manta rays, one of our favorite as dive enthusiasts, and skates. I popped in a picture of skates because they're often the forgotten group with these animals. So starting with sharks and rays that can be seen on the northern beaches, I'll just start with what everyone generally thinks of when they think of a shark. It's the requiem shark, or the whalers, the family Carcharinidae. And this is a pretty common one on the northern beaches. I haven't seen one out there myself, but I know many of you must have, especially down Manly Way, where they migrate to every single year. So this is a dusky whaler. Just quickly on the dusky whaler, they're highly migratory. They're globally distributed, so they live throughout the world. We're lucky to have a breeding aggregation here on the northern beaches, as I said. They have a broad in diet, but they are one of the slowest growing and latest maturing sharks in the world. So it takes them 20 years to get to sexual maturity, so even longer than a human. And what this means is when an animal has a low fecundity, that's what we call it, when it takes them longer to reproduce and they have less amount of pups. It's called a low fecundity. And when an animal has that, they're much more vulnerable to threats, because you can't, if we reduce their population, it's really hard for them to build that back up. So because of the poor dusky whalers' really slow and late maturation, it does mean that they are an endangered species, and they're protected as such throughout Australia and throughout the world. Moving on to a couple of the other common requiem sharks in the area. We have the sandbar shark, which is with their distinctively high dorsal fin. You can see that right here. You can see how it's a bit higher than the rest of these guys. They like sandy and muddy seafloors. They're also found throughout the world, and they're also vulnerable. And that's something you'll find through a lot of these species that I touch on, is they're either vulnerable or threatened or endangered, or even critically endangered in many cases, because sharks and rays are pretty hard hit by commercial fishing, and so we will see a lot of that. Moving in a clockwise direction, that shark at the 12 o'clock position is a spinner shark. And there he's doing a feeding behavior. So they jump out of the water in a swimming motion in an effort to stun fish through bait balls. And that's another pretty common requiem shark in this area. On the top right, if I just move my cameras here so I can see it, is a bronze whaler, another pretty common shark. They're pretty large species. They can get up to 3 meters. And unlike the rest of the sharks in this group, they do live specifically in temperate waters, so colder waters. All the rest of these guys are subtropical and temperate, so you'll find them up north into Queensland, but the bronze whalers generally stay at higher latitudes in the more temperate regions. Down here we have the common blacktip shark, and that's not to be confused with the blacktip reef shark, which I'm sure many of you have seen on your dive trips abroad and even up to Queensland. But this is the more cool water species, a common blacktip. And they're actually, compared to some of their other friends in this group, they're a bit more timid. Another interesting and globally distributed shark. The big nose shark, this guy down here, probably won't see him too much. They live a little bit deeper. They generally stay out of the shallows, but it is one that you find here on the northern beaches. And last in this group, on this little page, is the silky shark, which might be, it's unconfirmed, but it might be one of the most common shark species in all the world. And why I decided to group these sharks, why I picked these specific requiem sharks, is these are the ones that, according to recent shark surveys within the last few decades on the northern beaches, these are the most common sharks seen. Moving along, another one in this family that I'm sure many of us have heard of before is the bull shark, or Carcharinus leucus. So the bull shark is you can tell that it's a robust, more thick-bodied animal. It's a larger shark. And one thing that nearly everyone knows about bull shark is that it's a euryhaline species. So that means it can survive and it can thrive in a wide range of salinities. This means it can live easily in the ocean as well as it can in freshwater. Most sharks, in fact, all sharks but a few species only live in the ocean. There are a few species that only live in freshwater, but this is the only species that can live in both just as easily. There's some pretty cool stories when you think about a shark moving from the ocean to freshwater. Way back, probably hundreds of thousands of years ago, there was an eruption of a volcano in Nicaragua, and there were some bull sharks in a bay. And that bay got closed off, and now it's a lake. And those bull sharks have been isolated from the ocean for hundreds of thousands of years. So now there is a population of a subspecies of bull shark that lives in a lake in Nicaragua. So that's a pretty interesting fact about these guys. Another one just about how far they can swim into freshwater is that they've been found swimming up the Mississippi River into all the way up to Illinois. And if you know that, some about the state's geography, that's about 1,200 kilometers from the ocean. So it's pretty amazing how far these guys can find their way from the ocean in their search for food. Yes, and this is it's a large generalist predator, and this is one of the ones that I will be talking about again as a shark that is potentially, that has been identified by the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries as being a potential danger. Another shark, one we all know and probably some of our favorites, is the great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias. Another one of these sharks that can be potentially dangerous, probably the most famous shark on the planet. It is the largest predatory fish, can get up to 6 meters in length. Most of them are smaller, but recent research has shown that these guys can live up to 70 years old. So it's pretty cool that these big animals can live that long. They're an absolute marvel of evolution. Most sharks, almost every shark and almost every fish is cold-blooded. But the great white shark doesn't exactly fit into that category because it uses a sophisticated system of blood vessels in its body, whereby cold blood will run next to warm blood leaving the muscles, and thereby using counter-current exchange will heat up that blood. And that heated blood is sent to their eyes and to their brain, so that their eyes and their brain are held at a slightly higher temperature than the surrounding seawater, making them an even more efficient predator. So it's pretty awesome that while they're not completely warm-blooded, this shark has evolved a system to give it an evolutionary advantage over its prey, which is a pretty amazing thing. As Carmen mentioned in the beginning, HSI, we are very proud that this is the first shark with any federal protection in Australia after a nomination from Humane Society International in 1992. They're still vulnerable here in Australia as well as around the world. So again, these sharks are also unfortunately in decline. Another large and what is classified as potentially dangerous, the third of the big three, they say, is the tiger shark, or Gallicerdo cuvier. The tiger shark is whereas the great white shark lives in temperate waters, is a very active predator. The tiger shark is a very different. It's a very tropical based predator, and it is very lazy, and it is ambush. And when I say lazy, I don't mean that in such a bad way. It's just how this shark is, and it's an absolutely beautiful animal. But I mean lazy to say that since they're the lions of their savanna, they are a very generalist predator, and they will investigate and consume anything that's dead, sick, dying, rubbish, not even a prey or food item. It doesn't matter to a tiger shark. They'll ingest it and worry about the details later. I'm sure you all have heard stories of cannonballs and number plates and suits of armor being found in the stomachs of tiger sharks. But one thing that I'd like to say is that when I have spent some time in the water with these animals, and it is true that they are lazy ambush predators. And if you watch them, and some older gentlemen that had been doing it a lot longer than I had taught me, as long as you're looking at the tiger shark, they won't bother you. They're not interested in chasing. They're not interested in a fight. All they want is the easiest meal they can possibly find. And as long as you keep your eye contact on them the whole time, they won't bother you. And from my experience, that turned out to be true. So they're a fascinating animal. They're absolutely beautiful, and one of the coolest experiences I've had in the waters being with them. Now moving on to some of the more pelagic. So these probably won't be ones that you'll see diving because these are further out to sea, living out in the open ocean. Sharks like the thresher shark appear. There's 3 species of thresher shark. There's the big eye, the pelagic, and the common thresher shark. They use that incredibly long caudal fin to exactly what their name suggests, to thresh at prey. It's used as a whip to stun prey in bait balls, and then they easily pick up the scraps So a very, very beautiful animal and an amazing shark. I'll move down to this one. Some of you probably recognize this guy. It's a mako shark. You can tell that it looks very similar to the great white shark, and they are very, very closely related. They're in a group of sharks together called salmon sharks or lamnids. So like I said, so if the great white shark is the sport utility vehicle, then the mako shark is a sports car, where it's smaller but it's faster. And many of you know that the mako shark is the fastest fish in the sea, and they can reach speeds of up to 96 kilometers per hour when chasing down tuna and other incredibly quick prey. Just like the great white shark, they also have that sophisticated system of countercurrent exchange with their blood vessels, meaning just like the great white, the mako shark can keep their eyes and their brains at a higher temperature than the surrounding seawater to give them that predatory advantage. Moving along over here, the blue shark. This is one of what I think is one of the most beautiful sharks in the ocean. And the blue shark has the unfortunate designation of being the most heavily fished shark on the planet. With their open ocean habitat, a lot of blue shark habitat overlaps with things like tuna, a lot of the open ocean fish species that humans depend on. And it means that anywhere from 20 to 30 million blue sharks are taken out of the oceans each and every year, which is far more than any other species of shark. It's actually one of HSI's priority campaigns to get this shark some protection on an international stage and get regional fisheries management organizations to cooperate with one another to really give the blue shark some respite, because it is a sad fact that it is so heavily fished, and it is such a beautiful, beautiful animal. The oceanic whitetip is probably my favorite shark, and it's because of a few reasons. It's just an absolutely amazing open ocean predator. And a really interesting fact about the oceanic whitetip is that it's probably responsible for more attacks on human beings than any other shark species, even all of them combined. And I'll tell you why. So it lives in the vast open ocean, which, if you can imagine, a completely blue desert, blue in every direction. There's no food anywhere, so these guys have to be the ultimate opportunists, and they will taste, they will try anything that's floating around, because they don't know where their next meal is coming from. Now, if a shipwreck is to occur, or a plane crash, or anything that could go down in the middle of the ocean, you guessed it, these are the first guys to show up on site. And that's why we have to say probably responsible, because we can't prove that they've taken all those poor shipwrecked sailors over the last hundreds of years. But if anything has happened in the water and crews have disappeared, you can bet that it was probably had to do something to do with oceanic whitetips. There's a really cool story. If I'm sure many or most of you have seen the movie Jaws, where the old fisherman Quint is telling a story about a battleship in World War II called the USS Indianapolis. And this battleship had to do a very secret mission where they were transporting an atom bomb to another US air base. And the mission was so secret that they didn't tell anyone that the ship was moving between these two points, as no one was looking for them. And the ship went down in a storm, and hundreds of sailors went overboard, and they had to wait for 12 to 24 hours to get rescued, because no one knew where they were. And you better believe that hundreds and hundreds of those sailors fell prey to oceanic whitetips, because that's how they do. That's how they live their life, just scavenging like that. And it's an incredible part of the movie, and just a really a chilling and thrilling story about the oceanic whitetip. Hammerhead sharks, another one of our favorites, and another just iconic shark species. Of course, they're named that for their head, which is called a cephalofoil, what biologists termed that. There's 3 species of hammerhead shark that can be found in New South Wales. They're all kind of overlapping down here. The great hammerhead, this one on the left, which is the largest of the 3 species and can live all over the world. The scalloped hammerhead on the top right is the smallest of these 3 species and normally stays in tropical and subtropical regions. They're very common up on the Great Barrier Reef, actually. And another one of our priority campaigns is they're actually still being caught in commercial fisheries in the Great Barrier Reef and sold as a part of the Asian fish trade. So even in a World Heritage Area, Great Barrier Reef, an endangered species like the scalloped hammerhead shark is under fishing pressure. So as I said, that's another one of HSI's priority campaigns is to get some relief for the scalloped hammerhead that's getting hit so hard in the Great Barrier Reef, which is surprising. And then that guy on the bottom right is a smooth hammerhead, and he's more temperate. So he's more common down in New South Wales and Victoria, and he likes cooler waters. So the ways to tell these three species apart is number one, size. So great hammerhead's the largest, and smooth is middle, and scalloped is medium. Another way is their distribution. As I said, scalloped is more tropical, and smooth hammerhead is more temperate. So the best way to tell them apart is there's you can tell sort of from these pictures, but the shape of their cephalofoil is slightly different. So when worst comes to worst, you can always depend on that to tell these three species apart. Now we're moving on to some of our stranger shark species, but probably some of the most common ones in our areas, things like the wobbegongs. So these guys are really great. I always love seeing these guys snorkeling around. I've heard in some places that wobbegong is an Aboriginal term meaning a shaggy beard. I can't confirm that, but it seems to fit them pretty well. There's three species of wobbegong in New South Wales. There's the banded Orectobolus hallei, the spotted Orectobolus maculatus, and Orectobolus ornatus, the ornate wobbegong. Absolutely beautiful little animals, but you should watch out because they do bite. In fact, the last shark-human interaction that took place on the northern beaches was in Manly. I think it was back in October, and it was a wobbegong that bit a surfer. And not that it would be that dangerous or that it would be that bad, but they have a habit of not letting go. I had a friend that was doing some research work on wobbegongs recently, and he got one that didn't want to cooperate, didn't want to be tagged. I can't imagine why, but it would bite its own tail and form a little wobbegong donut as a defense mechanism and sit there. And so he left it alone, and then he got out of the water and he went back the next day to tag more sharks, and the little wobbegong donut was still there biting onto its own tail the next day. So they're really kind of cute that they like to do that, that they use that as, I guess, a defense mechanism, we can only suppose. Another very common shark that you guys, I'm sure, see a lot of out there is the Port Jackson. These are the bullhead sharks. There's two in New South Wales, the Port Jackson, which is very common. Oop, skipped ahead. And the crested horn shark, which is another species that's less common. And these are in the family Heterodontidae, and what that means in Latin, it just went back again. Nope, now I'm getting old. Okay, so what Heterodontidae means in Latin is different teeth. The really interesting thing about this family is they have different, all sharks have the same teeth, but these sharks have two different kinds of teeth, kind of like a human or many other animals. So they have their front teeth are sharp and pointy for grabbing and holding on to prey. And then their back teeth are more like molars, where they're good at crunching and crushing shells of crustaceans and their prey and things like that. So they're very interesting little sharks, and they're absolutely adorable. Moving on to another strange group of sharks are the angel sharks. And way back in the evolutionary history, when sharks and rays decided to diverge on their two paths, this guy didn't get the memo because he acts like a ray, he looks like a ray, but he's a shark. So he wasn't really sure which branch he wanted to go down. But these guys are sharks, and as you can tell, they look very ray-like. They got these really weird little faces, and they bury themselves in the sand just like this. And they're ambush hunters, and they wait for another a fish to swim by, something like that, and they swallow them whole. These sharks are very interesting. They're also hit hard by trawl fisheries. So these are the fisheries that drag chained nets across the bottom to pick up things like scallops, bottom-dwelling demersal fish, and things like that. And since these guys live on the bottom of that, these guys are hit hard by those trawl fisheries. This eastern angel shark is this one here, with the close-up and the one that's half buried in sand. He's a vulnerable species who we are currently working on to get him nominated to be federally protected by the Australian government. So he has a nomination that's being reviewed at this time. Another strange shark that I've never seen in my life, and I honestly had to do a little bit of research on for this presentation, is the broad-nosed seven-gill shark. So because of its name, it obviously has 7 gills, and that's something of note because most sharks have 5. Almost every shark has 5 gills, but this guy has 7. And something that's pretty amazing about this guy is it's thought by researchers, hasn't been proven yet, but it's thought by researchers to be so similar to other sharks in the fossil record that it may be the same species that existed during the time of the dinosaurs in the Jurassic period 200 million years ago. So he really is a living fossil, and it would just be so cool to see one of these guys. I think they're known here as cow shark or mud shark. Maybe someone can verify that for me. But yeah, it looks like just an incredible, very interesting animal, a living fossil to be sure. And of course, one of our favorites as snorkelers and divers and ocean users in New South Wales is the gray nurse shark. It's obviously a large coastal shark with a global distribution. Actually, a lot of people outside Australia and outside the places where these guys live naturally also know about gray nurse sharks because they do, for a large shark, they do phenomenally well in aquariums. So these are very common throughout the world in public aquariums. I grew up in a place nowhere near the ocean, so this probably was one of the first sharks I've ever seen. And I do remember their fearsome appearance of those raggedy teeth in the aquarium. But obviously, as many of us will know, they are docile despite their fearsome appearance. They are nocturnal ambush hunters, and they do this. They're able to achieve a high level of success at doing this and sneaking up to sleeping fish by rising to the surface and gulping air to keep themselves neutrally buoyant. And that's how they're able to just float there. It's pretty awesome and incredible that they're able to do that. They were hit really hard by wreck fishing and spear fishing in the 70s and 80s. People thought they were dangerous. People thought they were a threat. And those populations declined drastically. They are now critically endangered on the east coast of Australia, with up to about with the latest estimates being about 3,000 individuals remaining. They migrate between here and southern Queensland every year in a pupping and birthing cycle, but they are very highly, have a high site fidelity. So they always return to the same places like Southwest Rocks, Seal Rocks, Solitary Islands, Montague Island. Used to be a colony in Maroubra, I believe. I think that was before my time in Sydney. Carmen's shaking her head yes. So I'm not sure if they've returned there yet. I'm sure some of you will know better than I do. But it's really critical that they have those areas of critical habitat because they really do rely on those places. And they are an absolutely beautiful animal and be an absolute shame if we lost them. They still face fishing-related threats through the direct or indirect ingestion of fish hooks. And what I mean is accidentally hooking a gray nurse and cutting your line, or leaving your hook in another fish that the gray nurse then consumes. And these hooks that are ingested by the gray nurse shark do massive damage, can lead to septicemia, which then leads to lethargy, leads to cessation of reproductive abilities, and in the end, death. So it's pretty bad for these animals. But it's led to some really cool conversations between responsible wreck fishing and how they can address some of these issues, especially with one of the coolest ideas I heard with the production and development of biodegradable hooks. So fishermen can use these special biodegradable hooks that will obviously dissolve and work themselves out of a gray nurse shark's body cavity, unlike the stainless steel hooks that stick around for a very, very long time and do a nasty bit of damage to these beautiful animals. Lastly, I don't want to forget about the rays, the other half of the shark and rays equation. These guys at the top, these ones here, these three right here are some of the most common you'll see in this area. And these ones, the bottom ones I kind of threw in to show some of the real biodiversity of this group as well. Up on the top left is the Australian cow nose ray, probably the most common ray in our area. And if you can see this little picture, I should have made it a little bit bigger, but they form these dense feeding aggregations, this absolute balls of hundreds and hundreds of Condos rays. It's just beautiful to see, and I haven't seen it in person, but just drone footage of it and such, it just looks amazing. Really cool little animal. Also the southern eagle ray, similar in behavior to these guys, but spends more time at the bottom. These guys eat benthic invertebrates, things like crabs, clams, crays, things like that. The same food for the black stingray, which is not endemic to Australia, but just Australia and South Africa. So not a global distribution, but just some places in our general worldly neighborhood. They're one of the largest species of stingray, can get up to 2 meters across. So I'm sure some of you guys seen some big ones out there. And yeah, they can get pretty large. The fiddler rays, there's 2 species in New South Wales. This one's an ornate fiddler ray. And these 2 species are endemic species, so you'll find these nowhere else in the world. Just a really beautiful and amazing animal that we have here. And then, of course, showing up in New South Wales from time to time are manta rays and guitarfish. Guitarfish is a really, really interesting animal because just like how angel shark was confused, and even though he wanted to be a ray, ended up being a shark, I think this guy wanted to be a shark and ended up being a ray, because the guitarfish is actually a ray. What the difference between sharks and rays, most generally and most simply put, is that rays will have their mouths and their gills on the ventral surface, on the underside. So this guy's mouth and his gills are underneath that flap and facing downward. So he is technically a ray. Guitarfish, there's 12 species worldwide, and 11 of them are critically endangered. So they're really probably the most endangered and threatened group of species on the entire planet. Fortunately, Australia, those populations are a little bit better than they are throughout the rest of the world. And so us conservationists, marine conservationists, like to think of Australia as a lifeboat for these species. So we got to do everything we can to protect them here in Australia and do what we can here because their numbers are really dwindling and really, really hurting throughout the rest of the world. And of course, I'll just touch on manta ray really briefly. Don't come down into New South Wales that often, but if I'm talking to a group of divers and dive enthusiasts, how can I not speak about manta rays? Because they are one of the most amazing animals to spend time in the water with, and they're just absolutely incredible. Their global distribution, they mostly stick to tropical waters, and not only are they beautiful, but they are extremely intelligent. So each individual manta ray has individual markings on the dorsal and ventral surfaces on the top and bottom. And they can actually identify one another, and they can remember the friends that they have when they aggregate once again. There's a test that animal researchers used when testing a species' intelligence. It's called the mirror test, where most animals, and even up to including cats and dogs, when they approach themselves, their image in a mirror, it's either they attack it because they think it's another animal, or they just ignore it. And this is what most animals do. But highly intelligent animals, things like primates, elephants, dolphins, they will actually recognize that they're looking at a reflection of themselves and start to behave in a way that insinuates that. And when a mirror was put up to a couple manta rays in captivity, they did the exact same thing. They swam back and forth in front of the mirror. They started twisting and turning on their sides, looking at parts of their body they can't see with their own eyes. And they actually started facing the mirror and blowing bubbles and watching themselves blow bubbles. So it's so amazing that these are probably the smartest fish in the sea, these manta rays. And they can actually identify when they're looking at themselves. So they do have an incredible self-awareness. So for those of you that have spent time in the water with manta rays, you'll agree with me that it's probably one of the most amazing experiences you can have. And for those of you that haven't, I can't speak more highly of it, and you should really get out there and try to have that experience. Carmen, I think that's it where I got talking about shark and ray species in New South Wales. And if there's questions about that kind of stuff, I would be happy to field those at this time.
Yeah, fantastic. I think we have got, do we have any questions now? I don't think we've actually got questions. We've got a lot of great facts and comments. Would anybody like to ask a question right now about anything so far? Feel free to.
I think Matt just put one up then.
Yeah. All right. Matt, why don't you ask this one, mate? Do you want to unmute yourself? Thanks, Liv.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I've been writing them down as I've been going along. The first one I was really interested in, sorry, ex-biologist, but what allows bull sharks to cope with that massive salinity gradient? Because everything else just dies if you stick it in anything salty or anything fresh.
That's right. And as you being an ex-biologist, I'm sure that I'm not going to give you as good an answer as I should be able to. But it all has to do with nitrogen phosphorus pumps in the cell layer. So it's about maintaining an internal salinity that matches the outside, and something about their body chemistry, and I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer than this. It's something about their body chemistry allows them to manage that, or to evolve to have been able to manage that, whereas other species either it wasn't necessary or never were able to overcome that hurdle.
Cool. I had a couple more. I'll probably leave somebody else to do the next one, but the main one at the end of that was, what's the best thing we can do as Sydney divers to protect our local shark species?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, Matt. I think that would segue perfectly into the next half of my talk. Yeah, but I think the number one thing that anyone in the public can do, and especially in our privileged position as divers and ocean enthusiasts, is education. Really getting people to understand not only how amazing and beautiful these animals are, but how important they are, and how an ocean ecosystem is a very, very delicate balance. And if we like our fish and chips, if we like our prawns and we want to continue that, if we love fishing and we want to continue that, if we want to pass it on to our children and their children, then we have to do everything we can to protect the ocean as it is now. Because as a biologist, as I'm sure all of you guys understand, any removal of any piece of that ecosystem can cause things to collapse into a dangerous imbalance. And it's impossible to foresee what effects that will have. But just recognizing that the ocean isn't inexhaustible, that fisheries do need to be managed, and if they're managed, we can continue getting protein from the ocean. We can continue recreating in the ocean, and it's all interconnected. And just people understanding that it would be a massive help.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Daniel Martinez, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Daniel? May not have mic. His question was, no mic. So his question for you, Lawrence, was where do zebra sharks fall under?
Zebra sharks.
Zebra.
Yeah, so they'll be they're carpet sharks and cat sharks. So they're closely related to the wobbegongs. That will be their most closely related relative in this group that I'm presenting. Zebra sharks are those that live up in tropical areas. I think some people also call them leopard sharks in Australia. It's not to be confused with American leopard sharks, which are very, very different animals. But yeah, zebra sharks, I think they're most closely related to those wobbegongs and the bullhead sharks, the ones like the Port Jackson.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah. Kate, do you want to unmute yourself, hon?
Hello. Yes, I was just wondering whether anybody has ever filmed the great white sharks giving birth, because we never hear anything about that. Has anyone seen it or witnessed it?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I don't think so. In recent years, certain areas around the globe have been termed white shark cafe or certain places like that, where they have found aggregations of sharks that seem to be getting together for no other reason other than to breed. But yeah, you're right. It's a lot for a lot of these animals. It's a big mystery. and white sharks included, that we're not sure how they breed. We do know that from necropsies of pregnant females, we do know that they are limited to 1 or 2 pups every year. I think it's actually once every 2 or 3 years. But yeah, no, I don't believe anyone's have seen a great white shark give birth.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. All right. If there's no more questions, we might pop them into. Oh, hang on. We've got Tony. We've got Tony just saying, I believe the closest relative is the whale shark. And Mark says he's seen a video of a white shark pooping on a diver. That little input there, Mark.
Yes, that's a great point about the whale shark, because yeah, I was just trying to relate it to the ones I'm covering here. But yes, the whale shark is also a cat shark, which is funny to think about, that the largest shark is most closely related to these tiny little carpet and cat sharks, like the little bamboo shark and things like that. But yes, he's absolutely right. It is closely related to the whale shark. Perfect.
Thank you so much. We might continue on, and we can always do the rest of the Q&As at the end, because we're shooting through time. So let's get on to shark.
Yeah, sure. Excellent. Yeah. So I think the best segue that we can do is when we have this amazing diversity of animals and sharks and rays right off of our coast, it's kind of shocking to understand that our answer to dealing with the low, albeit very real risk of shark bite is through the shark nets. This is a scalloped hammerhead. This was taken at Palm Beach. This is when our photographer, Nicole, went out with Fabio and captured these images. So I'll give a little bit of background about the shark nets. I'll tell you why they're bad. I'll give you the alternatives to the issue, and hopefully we can start some good discussions. So Carmen touched on that we are HSI. I just wanted to briefly say that we have our fingers in many pies. If it has to do with environmental conservation or animal welfare, we are involved. We were especially involved with the bushfires this last summer. Most of the office does that. I'm one of the few guys who works on the ocean, but a lot of what we do is native wildlife. We deal in animal agriculture. So if you guys do have any interest in that, I encourage you to go to hsi.org.au and check out some of the other work that we do. Specifically on shark conservation. So I am the ocean campaigner at HSI, but I would say 90 to 95% of what I focus on is sharks and rays, because they are the group that needs the most help. So we have campaigns on shark culling. Here, of course, here in New South Wales with the nets, but also up in Queensland. Again, Carmen in the introduction pointed out that we did have a massive court victory against the Queensland government just last year that essentially stopped the lethal culling of sharks within the Great Barrier Reef. We still are having issues politically consolidating that victory and making Queensland adhere to the court orders to stop killing the sharks. But we have at least ended that program on a legal basis. There is more work to be done, but we are very proud of that victory. She also mentioned our threatened species nomination. So each and every year, for the last couple of years, we've been nominating 3 or 4 species of shark. On the docket this year, it's that eastern angel shark. There's a little shark called the white-finned swell shark, a long-nosed skate, Sydney skate, narrow sawfish, and a couple others that we're nominating right now to be federally protected under the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act under the federal government. We also do a lot of work with fisheries with our partners in the Shark Champions campaign. Our partners are the Australian Marine Conservation Society, AMCS. I'm sure most of you guys have heard about them. We work with them closely on fisheries, trying to make sure that they're managed so that they can continue to be used into the future, so that we're reducing the amount of bycatch in the fisheries and so on and so forth. And lastly, the thing we work on is international trade and conservation instruments. We'll go to big international meetings of on the trade in endangered species or in international cooperation on migratory species. And I'll really push sharks being added to those instruments, different species, so that we can get some international cooperation on some of those conservation efforts. So moving specifically into the New South Wales Shark Meshing Program. It began in 1937 after a spate of lethal shark-human interactions on Sydney beaches. The stated objective of that time was to reduce the local population of sharks, because the logic thinking is less sharks in the ocean, less chance people are going to get bitten by sharks. Which, you know, a very 1930s attitude, you can't blame them for having, in a very realistic solution to that problem. So this program is nearly 100 years old, and it is shockingly very little has changed in those nearly 100 years. There are now 51 beaches in New South Wales with shark nets from Newcastle to Wollongong. And you can see using this math, the highest density of those nets are along the northern beaches, and especially at Manly, there's a bunch. The nets are in the water from, they're in from September 1st to April 30th. So the nets are out at this moment in time. They're pulled out for the humpback whale migration. So at least New South Wales does that. Queensland does not pull their nets out for the humpback whale migration. You guys may have heard some news today, and you'll see some images later of what happens when you don't pull the shark nets out during a whale migration. And we'll get to that very soon. This is a diagram. This is a New South Wales Department of Primary Industries diagram of what the net is. They're 150 meters long. They're placed in 10 meters of water, and they're 6 meters from top to bottom. So they do not form a barrier. They do not go headland to headland, and they do not even cover from substrate to surface. Animals can move freely around them, over them, and underneath them, and they are not meant to be a barrier. They are simply meant to be an equipment to fish sharks out of the ocean. So now I'll move on to the wildlife cost, and let's see if I can manages to share my screen here, just so I can show you guys that, because I was having trouble embedding this video. But this is a video our photographer took. This is actually up on the Gold Coast. They use the same type of shark nets as we do down in New South Wales. However, like I said, this is what happens if you don't pull them out soon enough, or you leave them in during a whale migration. So this is a humpback whale calf. Fortunately, this calf did survive this encounter. The mother of this calf was swimming under the net all around, vocalizing, very, very distressed about this poor little guy. And this exact thing happened this morning up in Queensland. It was the first one of the year at Burleigh Heads on Gold Coast. For those of you that didn't hear the news story already, a private citizen who was out in a tinny went out to the shark net, cut the calf out of the net, and the calf escaped. Now that gentleman had got an on-the-spot fine for tampering with shark equipment of $635. And if the Queensland government were to take him to court, he could be fined up to $22,000 for freeing a whale from a shark net. It's great. It's great that he did it. It's great that SeaWorld is up there to free whales from the shark nets. But in my mind, I mean, why is it necessary? This happens each and every year. For the last 3 decades, 5 to 10 whales have been caught in these shark nets up in Queensland. And it's an absolute travesty that at the very least, they're not pulled out during a whale migration. So now I'll get back to the PowerPoint. And yeah, and so going on the wildlife cost, just to put some numbers, this is another scalloped hammerhead that was photographed at the Palm Beach net in a trip that we went out with Fabio. But not only do they catch sharks and rays are the biggest hit. There's a what I believe is either an eagle ray or a cow nose ray caught in the nets.
Interrupt you. We're still on the whale video. Sorry.
Oh, I didn't stop sharing that. Okay. Thank you. Okay, let me skip forward. Okay, does everyone see the shark and the ray in the net? Awesome. Okay, yeah, so the sharks and the rays are the two hardest hit groups, but these nets are indiscriminate. As you saw, they catch turtles, they catch whales, and they also catch dolphins. So these are really, really, really killing machines. And I often get asked the question, oh, I guess that comes later. And so just to put that into numbers, since they were introduced in 1937, our best estimate, because the numbers from way back then are a little bit foggy, but approximately 19,000 animals have been caught and killed in New South Wales shark nets since that time. Since 2012, so not even 10 years, New South Wales shark nets have killed 963 sharks, 65 turtles, 41 whales and dolphins, and 265 rays. And 88% of these animals in the last 10 years were threatened or protected species. So it's, again, absolute travesty. This is another shark on the northern beaches. I think this is Whale Beach, the Whale Beach net. Another little scalloped hammerhead. Unfortunately, hammerheads are one of the most frequently caught in the nets because their little head, which is a miracle of evolution and a beautiful little sensory device, also dooms them when they get in contact with the net because they just can't seem to free themselves once they get tangled up. And with all that wildlife cost, you'd think, okay, well, if they're keeping the shark nets in and they kill all those wildlife, well, they should at least do something to protect the public, right? Well, that's a question I receive a lot, is do they work? And it really depends on what is your objective? If your objective is to kill sharks, to fish sharks out of the ocean, well, yeah, the shark nets are phenomenally successful. They do a great job at killing sharks and fishing sharks out of the ocean. But if your objective is to protect people, they fall well short of that mark for a few reasons. The first of which I explained to you, they are not a barrier. They don't stop sharks from coming in. Sharks can swim over, they can swim under. They are definitely not a barrier. They're just there to fish sharks out of the ocean. There have been 34 interactions on netted beaches. So even beaches with nets aren't protecting swimmers, including one fatality. So shark interactions still do occur on netted beaches. They're not making any difference. 40% in a 2012 study from Daryl McPhee, when he was looking into whether or not shark nets would be a good idea for WA, he found that 40% of the sharks caught in New South Wales nets were caught on the inside, on the shore side of the net. So 2 out of every shark is caught on the side that you're swimming on. And so just to think that they're actually keeping sharks out and protecting people is a complete fallacy. They're only there to provide a false sense of security. And the only reason they're still around is because there's a lack of political courage to take them out. Because if something were to happen to someone after the shark nets were pulled out, then of course the public would scream for their replacement. And that politician would be in a lot of hot water. But the more people understand the way that the senselessness of the shark nets and the sheer uselessness of them, I think the more would be passionate and the more that this effort would be moving forward. Lastly, nets with dead and dying animals become baited. So even a shark net that has served its purpose, that has killed or fished out a shark, that's going to attract more sharks to the area. I feel more comfortable swimming without a shark net because of this point specifically. And they're just not getting the job done. And I hope that I'm explaining that appropriately to all of you, that shark nets are really not the best way to protect people in the water. So there are non-lethal alternatives. So if we get rid of the shark nets right now, what are we going to do? Because people that maybe don't know about this issue as much as we do, politicians that are a little bit worried about pulling out the nets, they want something there. People want something there. And that's the one redeeming quality of the nets, is that I'm not going to deny that there is value in people feeling safe, even if it is a false sense of security. So with the non-lethal alternatives, there's alternatives that detect and there's alternatives that deter. And so those that detect are things like drone surveillance. This is a program that's being run jointly by Department of Primary Industries, as well as Surf Lifesavers. And this has been a trial for about the last 5 years in New South Wales. It's been very, very successful. Drones have been really, really great at spotting animals out in the water. The technology is constantly improving. There's imaging technology that can actually identify the species of shark that the drone is looking at, so that then the surf lifesavers can make an educated decision on if it's a hammerhead shark, and they say, oh, well, that animal poses no threat to those swimmers. Let's keep the beach open. There's no need to raise a fuss. Whereas if it is a potentially dangerous shark, they can do what needs to be done and close that beach. So the surf lifesavers love the drones. They've been worked really well. And actually drones are very helpful for the much more dangerous risk at the beach of drowning. So these, you can see it in this picture, this little red thing on the drone right there is a droppable flotation device. If someone's caught in a rip, the drone can zip out there and drop flotation. And it's really already has saved lives and paid dividends. So drone surveillance is a great, great alternative. Fixed wing aircraft, I'm sure all of you have seen helicopters flying over the beaches in the summer. This one's a little bit, I'm more on the fence about. It does provide that feeling of safety that people need, but there's debate as how effective it actually is at spotting sharks, effective at getting people out of the water. And it's vastly more expensive than the drone surveillance. So I think the drone surveillance have really made this fixed wing alternative obsolete. Also, there's these listening stations. Some of you may have seen these buoys up on the north coast of New South Wales, where there's a couple of them up there. The listening stations are good. They detect tagged sharks in the area. And the only drawback of these is that it only works if a shark is tagged. So in order for this to actually be a really good shark detection service, is you would have to tag a hell of a lot of sharks. So this is probably more under the category of helps people feel safe, but might not actually get much done as far as deterring. Then there's the big controversial one up here in the northern beaches, and I'm sure there's a lot of opinions on this one, and that's the smart drum lines. So smart drum line is essentially a traditional drum line with a baited hook tied to a buoy in the water. The only difference is that once that baited hook is taken, the contractor can rush out to the line. If it's one of the 3 target sharks, which I was talking about before, the great white, the bull, or the tiger shark, that animal can be tagged and relocated. If it's any other species of animal, it's simply released on the line. So they're meant to be a non-lethal alternative. Now, it's still putting a bloody great hook in the water. There's still an animal welfare concern, as some species cannot last on the hook for that long. These hammerhead sharks are very, very susceptible to post-release mortality, and so they don't last very long. So smart drum lines can still kill sharks. Smart drum lines still are baited and attracting sharks to the area. However, we applaud the Department of Primary Industries to trying to move to non-lethal alternatives, because as you can tell, as I'm sure you can imagine, the smart drum lines are much less lethal than the nets. And if we were given a choice between smart drum lines and the nets, Humane Society International, and ocean conservationists would gladly take the smart drum lines. So we kind of see it as a step in the right direction. But again, we are not thrilled by the prospect of smart drum lines. Another really great one is personal shark deterrence. Personal shark deterrents are things like shark shields, shark bands. There's a plethora of products on the market at this time. The way that the government can use this as a replacement for the nets is WA has shark shield subsidies they offer. A really great program where because these are a bit expensive. I think they run $500 to $800 depending on the model. But with a subsidy, you get $200 off, and this way, divers, surfers, people that wouldn't be really affected by nets or drum lines anyway, can really take the responsibility into their own hands. I think it's on the next slide. Oh yeah, okay. So I'm going to try to skip through some of the advertising bit of this, but this is Shark Shield using Ocean Guardian. And this is a study they did in South Africa. I'm going to try to meet this. A study they did in South Africa where they put a shark shield to the test. So they dragged a seal decoy behind a boat to get white sharks to chase after it. Half the time the shark shield was on, half the time the shark shield was off. And you'll see some pretty incredible footage of these white sharks diverting at the last moment when the shark shield is on. So I'll let you guys just go ahead and watch that and read the text. So that's with it turned off. You can see the breach and the interaction. And with it on, there was no breach and only 2 interactions. So look at these sharks coming up towards the bait and just veering off. This one's amazing. Look at that guy, just bailed out at the last second. So it's pretty incredible. A really, really great technology. If I can give you one piece of advice, and I'm sure Fabio will back me up on this, if you are wearing a shark shield and your boat is made out of aluminium, make sure you turn it off before you climb back in the boat. Otherwise, you will shock everyone in it. I'm pretty sure I got Fabio that one time. So Fabio, I do apologize for that. All right. And last but definitely not least is just education. I think the best way we can reduce our risk of a shark-human interaction or a shark bite is simply education. Knowing things to avoid solitary water activities, always go with a buddy. Surfing, diving, swimming, it's just a bad idea to go alone for so many reasons, and one of them is the danger, the risk of shark bite. Entering the ocean at dawn and dusk. I know that is a favorite time for divers and especially surfers, but hopefully just mitigating your risk in these other ways can overlook that one. Entering the ocean near river mouths, especially after it's been raining. That is a bad idea because sharks look for these areas. They look for things being washed out to sea for an easy meal. Entering the ocean near fishing or where fish have been cleaned. I think that's a pretty obvious one for all of us, but it's important for the public to understand these things as well as entering areas of known shark activity. Again, for us divers, this is a little bit different as we actively chase sharks and want to go to areas where sharks are. But it's about using common sense. It's about not antagonizing those animals, not overly feeding them, doing things like that. I know it seems like basic information, but just a little quick anecdote. I know we probably all heard of the terrible shark tragedies that took place in the Whitsundays last year. And just speaking with some of the Whitsunday locals, they all knew that that was an area of high shark activity. And the fact that there was 3 attacks over the course of a month and that area wasn't closed to swimming after the first attack, or those tourists weren't alerted to the fact that, look, people fish there, people clean fish there, people empty their waste tanks and more overnight, and we know that there's sharks in that area. Just getting that information out and helping people understand that could have saved a life. And so it's just some really, really simple things that we can do, that state governments can do to really, really protect people that don't have anything to do with killing sharks, and actually just makes us appreciate and respect these animals a lot more. And I think that pretty much covers it. I'm really happy to field any questions on the shark nets. For those of you that are fired up by this, that do want to do something about this, I encourage you to go to sharkchampions.org.au. It's this website that we run along with Australian Marine Conservation Society. There's a petition under actions, this tab here, and one is specifically for New South Wales shark nets. We're working with DPI to try to get them out of the water, really trying to, and really at the end of the day, if there's one takeaway I want people to understand is this issue isn't people versus sharks. The opposition will always tell you, oh, well, this is just because you care more about sharks than people, and that is not the case. I hope if I helped you understand one thing, is that there are better ways to take care of people in the water. There's better ways to mitigate against the risk of shark bite, and it has nothing to do with nets. It has nothing to do with killing sharks. So to dumb this issue down to people versus sharks is an oversimplistic view, and it's much more complicated than that. And I hope that that all came across. And thank you so much for your attention. And I do really appreciate you guys giving me the time to chat with you about sharks and the shark nets.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. I have a stack of questions here for you, so I've just queued them up, and I'll get everybody to ask themselves. Guys, if you don't want to ask, just pop a note in the chat for me to ask it for you. The first one was Ellie Pankhurst. Do you want to unmute yourself, Ellie, and ask the question?
I was just wondering, when you showed the graphs of the Central Coast shark nets, they were all hashtagged, and I was wondering if there's a difference with the nets on the Central Coast.
Was that on the map that I showed?
Yeah, where all the locations of the.
Yeah. Let me have a look. So that's straight from.
Yes. That one.
I see what you mean now. I think that's just splitting it up into their region. So when the Department of Primary Industries writes, they do an annual report on the program. And I think this is just splitting up their regions. But I do see a little stars and asterisks on a few others. To be honest, I pulled this map off their website. So I'm sorry that I can't answer that. I'm not sure what that's for.
Cool. Thank you, Ellie. Does that answer your question? Yeah, cool. Leon Knight, do you want to unmute yourself, mate? Leon, are you there? Not sure, let me check. His question was, is the netting the netted pool areas, or is he talking about shark netting in other places? I did mention it was the pool areas, but other places, but thought you could explain that better for him.
Yes, so the pool areas definitely form more of a barrier, and animals don't get caught in there. So it's a really tricky bit of language and rhetoric, but when we talk about shark nets, they're the ones that are about 100 to 200 meters offshore, running parallel to the beaches. And the shark netting or shark enclosures are like the pools. So no, not talking about those. Those are great ways for people to swim and get in the water if they want to mitigate the risk of shark. But no, this is just about the gill nets that are stationed about 100 meters off the beach.
Awesome. Thanks, Lawrence. Daniel Martinez, do you want to, I think we actually had you were muted before, weren't you? So let me just find it. Sorry, just 1 second while I find it. Is there a number of shark interactions for non-netted beaches?
Yeah, I can provide you one of that, but the thing is that there is so many non-netted, there's way more than 51 non-netted beaches in New South Wales. And a lot of those interactions dating back to the 30s would have gone unreported. So the only solid numbers that I can give you is from the netted beaches. I wasn't trying to compare a number to, I see what you're getting at. I wasn't trying to compare a number to non-netted beaches. I was just trying to dispel the myth that interactions can't happen because there's a shark net there. So hopefully I came across with that. But thank you for that. That is a really good point.
Perfect, thank you. Emma Taylor, do you want to unmute yourself, hon?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. So I was just wondering, just because obviously you can get hold of public data that shows that the shark attacks in Australia back to sort of the 1900s, and it does show the average number of attacks increased by something to like 1.9. Do you think that with the decline in shark population and the increase in the human population, so people entering the water, this has a correlation to the increased shark attacks?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that, Emma. Yeah, definitely. I think the increase in shark attacks has everything to do with the increased global population, Australian population, and the amount of people entering the water. The other thing that has, what I believe has has increased shark attacks or shark-human interactions, even if it's just a bump or an interaction off the end of a fishing boat or something like that, is these are intelligent animals. I mean, we all know that sharks have been around for something like 350 million years. And they will definitely be acclimatized to new situations. So following fishers, following fishing boats. This is why I believe that you hear so many anecdotal stories about sharks being in plague proportions, or how can there be a decline in sharks? There's way too many sharks. They're following my fishing boat everywhere I go. And that only makes sense because those are intelligent animals that have learned to get an easy feed off the back of a fishing boat. So increased interactions through acclimatization around fishing vessels, as well as more people in the water. Absolutely, I believe that those are the two reasons why shark-human interactions have increased since that time.
Awesome, thanks.
Yep.
And Emma, you had one more question?
Oh yeah, is there any way that like HSI needs volunteers in terms of divers for marine conservation? Is that something that is open to people?
Oh, heck yeah. Send me your email address. Yeah, that would be great.
Awesome, I'll do that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. No problem. Great. Silky? Sorry, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it. Do you just want to unmute yourself, Han, and ask your question? About smart drum lines. No mic. Okay, let me find it. Sorry, 1 second.
No worries.
Where is it? Are smart drum lines really less lethal? Surely baited hooks have a higher catch rate than passive nets, which could lead to greater overall mortality, even though more animals are released alive.
This is a great question, because it tells me that I didn't do a fantastic job at explaining why smart drum lines are preferable to nets. So yeah, you make a really, really good point. And the specific thing is what makes smart drum lines less lethal than nets is what they target. So where the nets will catch literally anything swimming through it, the only thing that'll take smart drumline baits are larger sharks. So things like the great white, things like the bull, things like the tiger that are really large, robust animals that can actually last on a hook for hours and hours and hours and be completely fine because they're tough as nails. Rays don't take baited drum lines. Dolphins and whales don't take baited drum lines. So at least these animals are safe. Sometimes turtles get a little confused and take baited drum lines. But no, that's a really, really great point that I should have said. It's what they target. I should have provided the statistics here, and I regret that I'm not. But if you look at studies that have been done on the north coast of New South Wales with smart drum lines and nets side by side, you can see that the smart drum lines catch maybe the numbers were in the 30s or 40s of animals over the trial period, where the nets caught about 200, and out of that 20 or 30 animals, about 15 to 20 were the target species of shark. So it was just those 3 species, so that were being tagged and relocated. So not only are smart drum lines catching and killing less animals, they're actually mostly catching only the large target sharks.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Ali, Devlin, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I'm just on the avoid getting bitten or having an encounter with a shark. I've always been told, like, don't swim as well after rain. But I didn't think it was to do. I thought it was to do with the runoff and the fish eating all of the rain runoff, and then it was why the sharks came in. The same with, like, is that right? I don't know. I'm asking questions.
Yeah. No, that's definitely right. That's definitely part of it. I think a lot of it also has to do with the visibility. I think a lot of sharks obviously are predators by sight. When they can't rely on that, they rely on their other great senses, one of which is taste. So a lot of times when these things happen, especially in low vis areas, someone gets a bite or a bump because the shark is trying to figure out what the heck is in the water in front of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really good point. With the rain, decreased visibility, more runoff into the water, fish feeding on the runoff, sharks feeding on the fish.
Okay, thanks. I've just got one more question quickly as well. The DPI, I'm sure they sent out a survey about shark nets within the last 6 months, which I answered. But. Yeah,
they did just a few months ago, and they presented all these alternatives, and they're trying to get an idea. And that's actually been really great. As much as I don't like the SharkNet program, I will say that DPI has been very cooperative with my organization, with people that are in opposition to the nets, and they are trying to move forward. And I think people even within that organization realize the failure of shark nets, both ecologically and public safety wise. And I think they're looking to get rid of them just as much as we are. They just can't say it publicly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Oliver Stubbs, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had one question.
Yeah.
So I used to work in scientific and commercial diving in Hong Kong. We used to do studies on shark nets in Hong Kong, and there they have, after there was a string of shark attacks in the 90s, they set up these gigantic nets that go from the surface all the way down to the bottom, hundreds of meters out. Is that something that's being done in Australia at all, or is that something that's being considered? And there's not been like, we were doing surveys on them, and there's not been any fish at all that were killed by these nets.
That's really interesting. I had no idea that Hong Kong did that. No, there's no discussions or no talks about potentially doing that anywhere in Australia. I think people are kind of realizing what an archaic technology shark nets are. So I think there's movement away from them. I haven't heard of any expansion of any programs or any of that. It would be good to move to a different kind of net. I'm sure the nets that they were using there were not gill nets. I mean, these nets are gill nets. They are designed to catch and kill fish. That's what they're designed for. So it's good to hear that Hong Kong probably tried to go down a non-lethal method, and did it work? I mean, was there any shark-human interactions?
There's basically not been any shark-human interactions at all in Hong Kong since the 90s. But the nets are made of pretty thick rope with sort of probably about that large size and just a couple of centimeters holes in the nets.
Yeah, right. That's very interesting. Okay. Thanks for that, Oliver.
Yeah. No, thanks for the answer.
Anna Heineck, are you in here? Sorry, not last but not least, hon. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah, perfect. Hi. Yeah, so a question about those smart drum lines as well, because you can't really get an answer anywhere either, or it might be a bit sketchy. Like, are there like set times for boats to go out and check the actual hooks, or because I just can't assume when the alarm goes off that someone will be immediately there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the smart drum lines are designed, and the trial is only run if a contractor can get to the drum line within 30 minutes is the deadline. So the smart drum lines, if they don't hear anything from them, I think they're checked every 2 days just to rebait and things like that. But during the trial, because they were a trial in the Northern Beaches, they do have to get out there within 30 minutes. And like I said, that's good for most of the large sharks they catch, but again, it's not good for all of the sharks they catch. They did lose a hammerhead on the smart drum lines during the trial. Because those sharks just don't do well with getting caught.
Yeah. Okay.
But thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Lawrence, Liv has a question now that she's dying to ask. Off you go, Liv.
Oh, great.
Sorry, I saw there was one of those smart, like, shark safe barriers they were putting up. I think it was up in Queensland. They basically were using like PVC pipes and hanging them to simulate weed kelp forests, so the bigger sharks don't like swimming through them, but it allows the smaller creatures like dolphins and turtles and that kind of stuff to swim through still. Would that be something viable that perhaps we could look at, or?
Yeah, definitely. I think I was speaking with those people as well. That's a great I think it's called the Eco Shark Barrier. But yeah, like Olivia was saying, it mimics a kelp forest. So there's long PVC pipe, and fish and everything can swim through it, but large sharks don't like swimming. They get entangled in kelp forests, so they don't like swimming through that. So it's been a really effective a deterrent for the sharks. Of course, as you would guess, the main drawback from bringing that down into here, working in New South Wales, is cost. Cost, as well as finding an ideal place to anchor those on the seabed. That's not changing so much. That's not going to get covered by substrate. Right now, I spoke with the company out of South Africa that produces that product a few months ago, and the only thing stopping them from building one in New South Wales right now was money. And DPI just wasn't ready to commit those kind of funds. I think they have a GoFundMe set up, and if they hit their goal, they're gonna install one on the south coast of New South Wales. But I don't know where they are with that right now.